For the web application development module, I'm going to do 2 videos, and the first one is going to be a little more general, and I will talk to you briefly about web page design and a little bit about the actual HTML and CSS documents that we find in our slides. Then I'm going to do a separate video that's going to speak a little more specifically to your homework assignment, because your assignment is going to be to do a very, very simple web page, and you can actually pretty much copy it straight off of the slides and then watch it work. And I'll say more about that in a few minutes, but I am going to be splitting this up. Web application development, of course, is very, very important. I don't have to tell you how many business applications run on the web. I think we've already said that in a previous lecture, and we talked about the fact that because of the standards that are so well developed that regardless of the environment you're in, if you write according to these standards and these rules, then you can expect that the page you develop will display and be seen as you expected it to be seen. And so there's just a great deal of activity going on in terms of business activity, because we have the platform of the internet, and then we have the web that runs on the internet. Let me once more make this clear. The internet, and we said this I think in the previous module, but the internet is a network of networks. It's just a huge network. And because that network is available and we can all get onto that network pretty inexpensively, it really levels that playing field and allows the big guys and the little guys, if you will, to play on the same porch. It really makes a difference for those who previously didn't have access to and the monies to have access to their own networks, or to be able to lease a network. The WWW, the World Wide Web, is simply it's an application that runs on the internet, if you will. So obviously, because if you're going to be in business, or most anywhere you're going to work, you're going to be dealing with web applications, and most any place you work, you are going to have a website or some web pages. And maybe as a manager, as you know, you're going to have maybe this website is going to be very critical to the success of your particular job, your particular function, but certainly to the organization as a whole. And it can be a black box where we say, I don't know anything about web pages, and don't write them, don't design them, don't know anything about them. So I need you to do that for me. And that's well and good to have those people that have the more technical expertise, but it's important that you at least understand a little bit about it. And so what we're doing in this module is introducing you to just some of the basic concepts of some, just want to talk to you for just a minute about web and web strategies, and the importance of planning, and then I want to talk to you a little more about actually how they get developed. So you'll at least have some understanding, and you can carry on a conversation and understand the terminology. And once you've kind of seen how a web page gets developed, and then of course you can imagine the complexity beyond that, but at least you'll not be in the dark. So at the end of the module, hopefully you'll understand that it's real important to evaluate your business needs and your requirements before you just sit down and open up a website or develop one. And you'll understand the importance of that planning, and you're going to understand how to use HTML and CSS to construct a very simple web page. We're going to talk about how you register a domain name, and we're going to talk just a little bit more about client server and even a CMS, content management system. But basically, web application development, I don't want you to get an impression from this very, very small module that we're at all doing justice to such a huge, huge topic. I mean, it's just a very, very big topic that involves, when we talk about web development, we again can talk about it from the managerial and the strategic perspective, and the business needs and what business need it is going to be addressing. And then we can talk about it from the programming side, and from the side of using markup languages to actually develop your website, and we can talk, there are entire semesters taught and degrees taught about how to appropriately design a web page. And then we also can talk about the technology, the platform, if you will, the client server. So when we talk about web application and web development, and it's a big topic, and we just really want to kind of introduce you to some of the elements of it. And your first or the next, if you're following along with your slides here, you're going to see about 4 slides that talk about determining business needs and reasons, developing a business plan, and I want to just kind of pull all of that together. But the bottom line is, the website is no different to any other technology that we would use in an organization. We are going to be using a website to advance the goals, the strategies, the objectives of the organization. I have to tell you, I can remember when the internet first came into being, and we first had a network. We could get on the internet at school, and I'd already been there, of course, a few years, and now we've got this ability to get on the internet, and the internet's all kind of new and different, and the World Wide Web, and we're just getting these very first browsers that were terrible compared to what we have today. And I can remember getting out on the internet and looking, trying to find some information, and sometimes you could easily waste an hour or two looking for something pretty common, because you weren't using exactly the keywords that it wanted you to use, we just didn't have all the tools and the search engines and the technology to make all of that work very well. But I suffice it to say, I'd seen a few web pages. Now, we still weren't buying and selling on the web, but I had seen a few people, and I knew, I had seen people that would have their own personal web page, and so I had seen some websites, obviously, because when I would go out and search for whatever, I would, of course, make it onto some site. Some of them were very, very user-friendly, and then some of them were pretty crappy. But I can remember a young man that had been a student of mine. He came by the office one day, and he said, "Dr. Williams, do you want a website?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, the dean has hired me as a student worker to develop websites for any of the faculty that would like to have a website." And I'm like, "Well, sure, I want one." Yeah. Yeah. And so he sits down and he says, "Well, let's talk about it." And I had him as a student in systems analysis and design, and so he knew that when you're starting a technology project like any other project, you start off by even determining whether or not the project is feasible. And so apparently the dean had decided that it was going to be worthwhile and valuable to spend a little bit of money to pay this young man to develop us some websites. And so we'd already gotten to that point, and so he sits down and he looks at me and he's like, "Okay, talk to me about what you want." And I looked at him and I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, what should I want? What are other people doing with their websites?" And And everything he would ask me, I would be like, I don't know. And so he finally said, well, what's your favorite color? And I said, I like lots of color. And I looked down and I had on this bright purple, kind of really bright jumper. I said, this is a pretty color. He said, okay. And so he said, now, are you going to want your picture on the website? And we had a little discussion, which all of that doesn't particularly matter now, but we had a discussion at that time. Apparently there were some faculty that didn't want their picture out there, and there were some female faculty that felt threatened by that. And so I said, well, sure, I want my students to be able to see me. And he's like, well, you might want to know some people. I'm like, no, I put my picture out there. And, well, what else do you want on there? Well, and so finally he just left, and he said, let me just work something up. And so he gets back to me in a week or so, and he says, here, open this file and see what you think. So he had thrown together an HTML file, a little bit of a website for me. And I looked at it, and I'm like, yeah, but gosh, those words are little, and wonder what those semicolons are for. And so back and forth with him, I said, Romero, you know, now that I look at it, I have this and that, and you know what, I probably would like to have my syllabi on there, and so at any rate, this kind of evolved, and I'll make a reference to this process again when we talk about the systems development module. But what I want you to see here is that I had no clue what I wanted, and you know why? Because I didn't really need a website, or there was no business need. There was no, there was just no reason for me to have a website. It didn't fit into any of my objectives at the moment. There was not a situation where students were needing to know more about me, or where I was needing to communicate with students. That was not the case. I really didn't have a business need. I just, if everybody else was, I want a website. Cool, I want a website. I want to climb that mountain because it's there. Now, I'm sure you understand that it is in fact true that most businesses clearly need a website, whether they're buying and selling or whether they're just doing business to business. But it is true that most businesses need a website. But I have to tell you, I can remember presenting papers at conference and doing a little bit of research and writing about the fact, because my doctoral minor is strategy and policy. So one of my first reactions, and maybe the process of going through this with Ramira, maybe that's part of what made me even begin to think this way, but I began to think, everybody's just throwing up a website for their business. Everybody's like running crazy, oh my God, we got to have a website. We got to have one now. And I began to ask this question, why? Why are we doing this? I'm not asking the question because I doubt it, but I'm asking the question because you need to be designing your website to serve a purpose. We don't just adopt technology because it's there. I don't just buy a car because, you know what, they make a blue car now and I only have a red car. Let me buy that red car. And you know what, they make trucks, so let me buy a truck. I don't have any need for a truck. I don't have anywhere to put the truck. I'm tying up a lot of my money buying the truck, but I just want a truck because it's there. Well, of course, that sounds facetious and silly, and that makes sense to us. But that's kind of what everybody was doing with websites. And we have a term in IT where we refer to bleeding edge technology rather than leading edge. Oftentimes, when you're on that leading edge of technology, you're on that edge that's so sharp you're cutting yourself and bleeding yourself dry. It's, we're just out there having the latest and the greatest, and that's really not necessary. It's overkill. It's tying up resources. It's creating inefficiencies or whatever. So the web was, in its beginning was a very similar. And even now, if you go to some websites, you'll notice that. And people are, of course, getting better and better at it and hiring professionals to do this. But it still remains that some people do a much better job with their website than others. And the bottom line is we've got to start out and we're, it's about who we are, who's my target audience, what do I want this website to accomplish? Am I trying to convince you to buy my products? Or is this a website for me to inform you? Am I an organization and I want to inform you? Am I trying to be persuasive to get you to join my organization, or am I just trying to share with you the information? Is this a website to help you understand how to do your taxes? That the government wants to show up or put out there to disseminate some information, or is this a site where I hope that that you're going to want to buy my products? And is this a product that's pretty well understood? Everybody knows about it. It's just it's just a website that you can also go to buy this thing that you've been buying for years in the store? Or is this a new product? Is this something, do I need to, exactly what is the objective of this website? Now, again, this sounds like, well, duh, but you would be very surprised at the people that maybe don't plan things that well. And, sometimes we, I think of Amazon a lot when I think about websites, because I think about I've taught my grandsons from the day they were born that readers are leaders and leaders are readers. And I've always said to them, as long as I can pay the bills and we can eat, I will buy you anything you will read. I will buy you anything you will read, as long as it's something decent, of course. I don't care if it's Sports Illustrated, I don't care if it's Marvel comic books, or, if it's a World War II history. I don't care how frivolous it may appear. If you will read it, I will buy it, as long as I, am not, broke. And because I believe that reading is that important. And so I can remember, even from a very young age, they would sit on my lap, and my youngest one, now my oldest one was born a little before Amazon, but my youngest one, from the time he was born, a little bitty fellow, and he'd say, "Monty, let's go to Amazon." And we would go sit here in front of the computer, and I would call the Amazon website up, and I would, I would say children's books or books for boys 3 years old, 5 years old, whatever. I would kind of get us in the ballpark. And the pages there would be so easy. I mean, he would look at the covers, and he would look at these books, and no, he wanted this one that had the dinosaur on it, and maybe it would be they would all be similar, but no, he wanted this one and he wanted that one. Now, he couldn't read, but he could tell by the pictures that this book was going to be, and he used to say, that book's going to that's going to be a chapter book, Monty, or book is going to have a lot of sentences. He could tell, just by their website, the ones that were kind of age appropriate for him, or ones that were going to be, that's going to be too many chapters, Monty, or that's going to be, and they were doing a very good job of putting their product out there. And I was always struck by that my little guys, even when he was quite young, he could shop at Amazon and do a pretty good job. Every now and then I would say, "Wait a minute, honey, I think you're picking out something that's not what you think it is." But then, by the same token, I could look for the books that interested me, and the way they presented the books for me, and the way they would make recommendations, and the reviews. And so I do a reasonable amount of shopping on Amazon, and a lot of what I do there is books, even though they're certainly way more than a bookstore. That's what they started out being, and many of you don't even realize or remember that. But Amazon was a bookstore in its inception. But they just do a really, really good job. And so can you even begin to imagine the planning that goes into a site as complex as Amazon? They sell every kind of thing imaginable, and they have relationships and with various retailers and then with just individuals, and I mean the list could just go on and on. But I just want you to stop a minute and think about the complexity of it, and I want you to understand that just to throw up a good looking website is not enough. You've got to be aiming at your audience. You've got to be accomplishing your goals. We'll talk in the systems analysis module about this feasibility analysis, if you will. But the bottom line is we always start out, as I'm saying, we don't just build a website and say if we build it, they will come. That's not true. Even a storefront, that's not true. Now, if we have a bricks and mortar store and we put it, right beside Walmart, and we make the signs look interesting enough, why, maybe the people will stop by. But we understand that we can't have that mentality. We have to think about what we're really going to gain from. I mean, does it make sense to implement this technology? And so a feasibility analysis is where we sit down and we say, well, somebody suggested we might want a website. Well, okay, what would be maybe the cost associated with that, and what would be the benefits? Now, we're just right up front, just thinking about the idea. We're not going to be real close. We're talking ballpark. But we've got to come up with that initial feasibility. Is it going to make sense to do this? And then, of course, we come up with a project plan where we began to look at all, what are the elements of the project, and what am I trying to accomplish? Am I going to sell products? Am I going to just be a communications, or an information, disseminating information about my store hours and things of that sort? I'm a restaurant. Am I going to post my menu? Am I going to, am I going to have directions? Am I going to allow reservations online? I mean, it's just the questions are just endless. And so you have a slide there that talks about developing that business plan. And, well, a couple of slides, or more than one slide actually. But also we're going to be looking into things like how many pages is the site going to contain, and people don't want to read just to be reading. We want to be clear. We want to communicate what we need to communicate completely, but we want to also do it in a concise fashion. So, and we got to keep that target audience in mind, who we're talking to, and things of that sort. And of course, we have a slide in here that talks about incorporating time for testing, and it says always test your web pages before you put them in production. The bottom line, there are a lot of automated, like bots and people post and repost and links and all of this, but you can put something out there for a very brief amount of time, and it can, and you're like, ooh, let me pull that back. I didn't like that, or that didn't look the way I thought it would, or I didn't run it by 2 or 3 people and I kind of missed something. So again, this sounds like of course, to test it before you put it out there. But you would be surprised at the people that don't test it well enough, and it gets out there with maybe some glitches, and then it's hard to reel it back in. Now, again, we could have an entire semester on planning and designing and all of the design features and the things you have to be concerned about, and we could just we could really expand on this. But the purpose of this module is just to kind of introduce you, and just to remind you that everybody probably does need a website. I don't doubt that, but they don't all need to be alike, and yours doesn't need to be like mine. And just because somebody else has a 200-page website, you may not need anything terribly sophisticated at all. What is every application or development or project should be addressing a business need. So we start with that business need. What do I need to accomplish? And from there, I then build that website that accomplishes that or those those tasks. Now, we're moving into the section here where we talk about HTML. And HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. It is a standard for creating web pages. And if we create the web page using the HTML, then a browser, again, we can create it on different machines. We can show it on. In fact, I can create an HTML file, and browsers may be on a tablet, they may be on a laptop, they may be on a desktop, they may even be on a phone. But a browser can present that, and HTML5 is the current standard version right now that's published. Of course, the previous one was HTML4. And it's called Hypertext Markup Language. This is not exactly a computer language in the same sense that, like C# or like some of your older procedural languages and things of that. This is actually, it is a markup language. It's basically we create these tags that communicate to the browser how to display this, on the page. And so you actually have these tags that are kind of encapsulated in these little rooftops like this, the greater than and less than symbols, if you will. But for example, we will have a tag, and you have a particular slide, and it's over long about slide 11 or somewhere in there. It's going to be the first. It says using HTML, what does it look like? That's the title on the slide. And what you see is what looks like some computer code. And at first glance, it may look kind of creepy. But if you really stop and look at it, and I hope you will grab that slide right now and look at it with me. I'm going to say some of these things in more detail in a few minutes, but for right now, I'm looking at this, and I'm not very good at holding these things up in front of the camera, but this is the slide, and I apologize, I've got notes written on it myself, but I'm trying to get it up. There you go. That's the slide I'm talking about, and I want you to notice that right at the very top of the document, there's a tag that says doc type, and then underneath it there's the HTML lang equal, and basically that's saying the language equals English. That first, that opening tag is just a required tag. End of story. When you create your HTML file, you put those two lines in there. And then we have the tag that says this is the header section, or this is the head. You're kind of giving a title to the actual page. Now, I want you to look on down a little further, and you'll see where it says body. And that's where the bulk of your development is going to happen, here where it says body. And there are just a few things and we'll talk about these again in a minute, but if you look at this with me, those first two, the doc type HTML and the HTML language equals English, just do that. Because I'm not trying to make you be a sophisticated developer. Just put those two lines in. And then I want you to notice that you have the word head in between, encapsulated in those little rooftops. And then you see a little bit of information there that needs to be in that header section. And so for your homework, I want you just to kind of repeat all of that right there. But I want you to notice that you see the word head prior to that information, and then you see it later, and it has a slash in front of it. Well, all that's telling you is that we're opening a head section, and then the slash says, okay, the head section is ending. The body section is where I really want you to be concerned with respect to your homework. And notice that we're opening that body section, and then we put the body, that's where the actual content of your page would come in. And then when you're finished with the body, you would put the same body tag, only you would put the slash in front of the word. And then and then we opened it with an HTML tag, and notice the very last thing is /HTML encapsulated, and that slash says I'm finished with the HTML. The slash means end. So we open the body with just the word body encapsulated here. I'm not very good at that. We close the body with the word body encapsulated, but the slash is in front of it. So if you really look at this, it's not as crazy as maybe you first thought. Now, there are a lot of commands, and you can Google. You could Google HTML for dummies. You could Google, some simple HTML. You can find some simple commands out there, and you have a slide here that talks to you about a couple of additional ones, like you can put you can open and close H1. You can put H1 or H2 or H3. Basically, what it's telling you there, these are symbols that increase or decrease the size of your font, and that's explained for you here on this particular slide. Also notice the P encapsulated, that is a paragraph designation. So when you open that P, you're telling it this is a paragraph until I say /P, and then that paragraph has ended, and we know that sets it apart with spacing and things like that. So these are just a couple of elements that you can use. Again, I'm not trying to make experts out of you, but I just want to explain these slides because I am asking you in your homework to do a little simple page. Now, the next slide talks about a cascading style sheet, a CSS. An HTML document is a document that has an HTML extension. For example, if you create a file in Word, you might notice that if you named it research paper, it might the actual name of the file will technically be researchpaper.doc. It puts that .doc extension that tells me it's a Word file. An Excel, would be a .xls and things of that sort. A text file is a .txt. You might see a picture, a JPEG file, .jpeg. That's a picture, and there are there are different types of files, obviously. So an HTML file is a file that has a .html extension, and when a browser sees that .html, it opens it, and of course if it is written according to the standards, it will display in the manner that you expected it to. Now, when a website, you might write several pages, but you always want to have a folder for your files for this website, so they'll all be in the same spot, because sometimes one calls the other. But you always want to name the opening page. You want to name it index.html. And the browser just knows that index file, that's the opening page. It interprets it as that. But the other pages, you can name anything you want to name as long as they have that .html extension. Now, this next slide talks about a cascading style sheet. And a CSS, or a cascading style sheet, is simply a way that we put styling and formatting issues. The CSS files kind of define how the page looks. With our HTML file, we're just telling it what? This is what's going to be on the page. This picture and this paragraph and these words and this heading and this title and this, what. But in the CSS file, that's where we tell it to make this title blue and this one red, and this one use this font and this one use another font, and make this centered and make this left justified. In other words, what does it look like? How does it look? That's what we do in the CSS. Now, your first question is going to be, well, why do we do a separate file? Why don't we just write it right in the HTML file? Why don't we do that? And when I ask you to create an HTML file and then a style sheet for that file, a lot of students get confused and they say, I don't get what you mean. Why am I doing two files? Well, I want you to think about this very seriously. It makes perfect sense. If your website, you might have 100 pages, and you know that you want your website to be consistent. You're going to have a similar color and logos and spacing and the way you arrange. Your web pages are all going to have some similarities. If I had to write every bit of this, make the heading blue and make the logo this and make the background gray and all this, if I had to do all of this on every page, do you realize how complex that would be now? So doesn't it make a lot more sense to just do this once? And then on the pages, you can tell the page can call this file in. Now you only have to write it once, and then on each page you just have to tell it where do I get the style information. You give it the name of the file to call in, and it gets it. And it's even more important if you want to change. What if you decide to change the color from red to pink? Well, you would have to change hundreds of pages. No, you just change the one CSS file, and now all of the pages that have called that file will automatically. So if you think about it conceptually, it makes sense why we have a separate file. The HTML file is what's on the page, and then we put all of these styling and things, we can put those in one style sheet. And that, again, you can name it what you want to, as long as it has a .css. In other words, as long as it's saved as a cascading style sheet. And then you have you have a slide that shows you very clearly an example, and it shows you, it says body and H1 and P. It's basically telling you that in the body we want the background color to be silver, in the first heading we're using Helvetica font. So what you have is you have the declaration that says font family colon, and then you tell it Times New Roman or Courier, whatever that font family is. Notice that the word silver is used there, but quite frankly, there are a lot of numbers out there for all the various colors, and you can Google it and find web page, HTML web page color examples, and but there are a few colors like silver, some basic colors that you can just use the color, and it will take it. But to do much sophistication, you're going to use these numbers. And you'll see those in my examples that I'm going to talk about a little later. So I'm going to come back and talk about this in a minute in the separate video, but I just want to say enough so that you've at least got an idea of what we're doing. And so in that cascading style, you have a that says you basically have two components. You have the property and the value. So that background color is your property, and then silver is the value. You have a lot of notes associated with some of these slides. Make sure you're looking at your PowerPoint slides. Make sure you're reading your notes. And if you do that, and then hopefully pause it if you need to, and look at those, and then come back and listen to what I'm saying, and it'll make sense. It's going to be Greek at first look, or if you've not looked at it and you just hear me, you're going to, what's she talking about? So there's also a slide there that shows you some things you can do. It talks about text align, font style, color, background color, and it gives you a little more information about those. So again, this is just some very basic information that lets you have an idea how websites get to be websites. Not trying to make you an expert at all. Now, I do want to go a little bit further here, and I'll come back, as I said, in a minute with a homework video, and I'll say a little bit more about those files. But basically, it's talking about it's talking. Oh, excuse me. I do want to say this. You have a file then that talks about how the HTML file calls in that CSS file. And on that, then you have a slide there where you have it looks just like that previous slide that had the doc type and the language is English and the header and the body and so forth. But there has been a line added, and it is highlighted. And it says link, rel equal, style sheet, type equal, text / CSS equal, master.css. And that looks kind of like Greek, but let me tell you, you would need to put that sentence in the head area of your HTML document, and you could put it exactly like that, except at the very end where it says master.css, if your CSS were named page3.css or website D, you can name it anything you want to, but that little part right there, you would have to have your file name there. Otherwise, you could type that exactly. And again, I'll say more about that in a minute. But anyway, we're going to move on to talk, just say a few more things about website development. We also, it's not just about developing a web page. We have client side as well as server side scripting. It's not all as simple as this markup stuff that looks, that's can be quite complex, but in its simple form, it's not that complicated. But it talks about, you have a slide here that talks about JavaScript and PHP and databases and so forth. But I want to make sure you understand that when we are dealing with web applications, you're basically talking. A web application environment has two parts. It has the client and the server. And the client side, of course, this is your browser. And anything that pretty much that runs a browser is a client. So whether you're on your tablet, your phone, your laptop, whatever, that's the client. And so if I type in Amazon.com or Walmart.com or whatever URL, whatever site I want to go to, I type that in and I hit enter. What I'm doing is I am requesting that a web server, which is just another computer, and maybe a different, there are all kinds of servers, but we're specifically talking about a web server. And so I'm making a request of the web server, and the web server then will get that requested page, that page that I'm asking for, and it will send it to me. And so there's going to have to be scripting and code, if you will, or development done for both the client side and the server side. So it's of course a little complex. I also want to mention a domain name. A domain name is simply Amazon.com. That's a domain name, for example. And basically, we like to use a domain name that is, catchy, and that more than anything that describes who I am in my business. There was a time, when people would go out and try to buy up all these domain names so that, if I own Amazon.com, well, if you give me $1 million, I'll sell it to you. But there is an organization that, and that organization is listed here on one of your slides, called ICANN, and they are they're the governing body. There are some people. The internet, there's not too many people in charge of the internet. A lot of things are pretty open and ungoverned in many ways, but of course you do have to. There has to be some method for making sure that who gets to use Amazon.com. Well, Amazon does, because they own it. And why do they own it? Well, because they've bought it. And basically, there are different ways you can search out there and see if this domain name has been already bought or whatever. But the bottom line is, for a very little amount of money, you can actually own a domain name. And so, of course, as a business, you're going to want to have, your domain name. And then it talks about choosing a hosting service. And there are a lot of ways that we can go about this. And you can get a hosting service that will do a lot of things for you. Even you have a slide here that talks about a content management system, a CMS, where another party actually provides virtually everything for you. You don't have to design and develop your own web page. They'll develop them for you, and they'll use templates and plug in your names and your colors and so forth. And so the good thing about that is, especially if you're an organization that doesn't have a huge amount of money or a lot of talent, a lot of people that know how to do the programming and so forth, well, it's certainly a convenient, but you don't have you're kind of losing your power, of course, and so you don't get to you don't get to be personalize things as much as you might like to, and have things just as customized and tailor-made as you would like to. But there are a lot of options out there, and the bottom line is you can go online and pretty shortly you can have your garage business up and running, and somebody can throw you up a website and you look like you're a big major player. Now again, we have just touched the surface, but I just want you to see that it has to do with planning. It has to do with the whole project of developing these applications. It has to do with our strategy. Why are we doing a website? How is this going to advance our goals? And then the way we do it, and the way we develop that site, and the way we put it in. And I mentioned Amazon earlier, and we're just talking, and we mentioned a little bit about the client server and the server side scripting, but it wouldn't do Amazon any good to have these great websites if they didn't also have the fulfillment and the operation behind it to make it happen. So huge area that we could just talk about for quite some time. But we do have here at the university a cross-disciplinary web development minor, and then of course for CIS students you will take at least one course in web development, and then there's another option where you can take a second web development or a second C#. But we do have some, and then we have classes in graphics art. So if you're interested in web design, there's a lot of different outlets for you here at the university, and if you are a CIS major, you will be doing a little bit of it. I'm going to close this video now, and I'm going to do another video concentrating just on the homework and saying just, kind of going back over some of this stuff that we talked about on the HTML and the CSS document.